Hi, and welcome back to Family Sociology. Children, yes or no, Part 2. Now, in Part 2, we're going to review some of the issues around voluntarily childlessness and at the issues associated with not wanting children. Then we're going to consider the reproductive technologies available in order to have children when one can't. And then lastly, we're also going to look at what's important in the ethical and social issues associated with reproductive technologies. So let's get started. Some individuals or couples choose to be voluntarily childless. Despite social pressure to have children, 7 to 8% of Canadians choose to remain childless. Now, there may be many reasons for this. Some women fear having to give up the equality that they have established in a marriage relationship if there are children who require care. Some couples want to keep their options open for new experience of all sorts. Maybe they want to travel, maybe they have hobbies, adventures, or additional education they want. Some, they don't have the partner with whom they want to have children. Despite growing acceptance of family differences, those choosing not to have children still face disadvantages. The outsider may become intrusive, wanting to know why someone remains childless. Remember the social script. Women who choose not to have children are often considered antisocial or psychologically defective, which of course is ridiculous. Now, couples' marriage may be considered unsatisfying, and they may be perceived as being selfish. Some pregnancies of both single and married individuals are unwanted or unplanned. Generally, women have 3 options, and there's no significance to the order of these options. I'm just listing them according to your textbook. So the first option is abortions. Abortion is the active termination of a pregnancy before fetal viability, around about the 20 weeks of gestation. About 90% of all abortions are occurring in the first trimester. In Canada, abortions have been legal since 1988. The number of abortions has decreased slowly in recent years. Greater access to contraception results in fewer unwanted pregnancies and therefore fewer abortions. The option of abortion has been very polarizing and sometimes losing perspective on the overall issue. For example, when does life begin? Conception? Or the fetus or baby breathing on their own? When? 2. Who has priority, the fetus or the mother? 3. Who controls a woman's reproductive system? Does she or her husband? The government? 4. When should an abortion occur in a pregnancy? Many more issues than just agree or disagree with abortion. The extreme practice of aborting female fetuses is known as female infanticide. Now, abortion, of course, is not the only option. Foster care is another option. The provision of care by a family other than the parents or the guardian of a child, and it's approved and arranged by a child welfare authority. Advances in medical science mean Canadian children are unlikely to be orphaned. With improvements in benefits for single parents, children less likely to enter foster care because of extreme poverty. They're more likely to be in foster care because of behavioral issues or because they're victims of neglect or abuse. The third option is adoption. Unlike foster care, adoption is a legal transfer of parental rights and obligations from the birth parent or parents to the adoptive parent or parents. Once parental rights have been terminated, biological parents cannot regain custody. There are one that's known as open abortions. Now, open abortions are a form There are, one, open adoptions, a form of adoption where the adoptive parents and the birth parents know each other and exchange information. It may even carry on over years. The closed adoption, the biological and adoptive parents know very little or nothing about each other. The records are often sealed, preventing a child from tracing his or her roots and preventing birth parents from knowing what became of their child. The indigenous families also have what's known as a custom indigenous adoption, where a privately arranged adoption between two families within an indigenous community. The goal is to ensure indigenous children are raised in an indigenous family to retain their language and cultural identities. Now, not so much as there once was, but there is still stigma attached to those who do not raise their own biological children. Notions of adoption being second best make some adoptive parents feel that they're not fully entitled to the child they are raising. Emphasis on blood ties and genetic heritage also undermined the recent flood of adoptees seeking contact with their birth parents. Raising the child oneself is almost impossible to know the numbers of who kept an unwanted child. Abortions, adoptions, foster care, they all can be counted, therefore knowing why somebody didn't want a particular child. So why might they? A child in a family is assumed to be wanted, but maybe they're not. Married women do have abortions and do place their children with other families in spite of the stigma. It does happen. Many unplanned children are very well loved. Many unmarried mothers choose to raise children by themselves and can and are positive role models. So what about those who are desperately seeking baby? Meaning couples who want children, however, they're unable to produce them themselves. It's also known as involuntary childlessness. Usually women feel the lack of children more than men because of the social pressure and the psychological effects of wanting children but can't produce them. Infertility is defined as the inability to conceive after 1 year of unprotected sexual intercourse. 16% of Canadian couples experience infertility. Infertility can be traced to either the man or the woman or a combination of the both. Some explanations of infertility include, the age. Fertility declines with age, so that could be a factor. Lifestyle choices, whether you smoke or have a weight concern or a weight issue, it could impact. Infertile couples may have a sense of being defective, which reduces their overall sense of self-worth. The medical investigation is intrusive and can be uncomfortable for some. In the past, the limited options to infertility were adoption and foster care. Today, there are several reproductive technologies, and let's look at some of these assisted reproductive technologies. Some of these can include artificial insemination, in vitro fertilization, and surrogate mothers. So let's look at them individually. Artificial insemination is the practice of using sperm from a donor to fertilize an egg. The donor's sperm is used when the husband is infertile or carries a genetic disorder. Also used for unmarried women and lesbian couples who wish to have children themselves. Now, many single and lesbian women are not interested in using clinics or artificial insemination as clinics suggest as treatment for infertility. They don't feel they have any problem. They aren't broken and are not in need of any treatment. Plus, it enables them to have more control over their fertility. As sperm is not paid for or sold in Canada, it is not a commodity by the Assisted Human Reproductive Act. Therefore, in Canada, there are somewhere between 30 and 70 anonymous sperm donors. Most fertility clinics pay for sperm imported from the U.S. paying for sperm is legal in the U.S. We'll touch on in vitro fertilization as the second type of technology. Here the technique is of fertilizing the woman's egg with her partner's sperm in a lab dish and later placing the embryo or embryos in her uterus. The procedure usually is used when fallopian tubes leading from the woman's ovaries are blocked. In 1978, the first test tube baby was born in England. Her name was Louise Brown. IVF, which is the in vitro fertilization, it's usually very expensive. To get one cycle of IVF costs between $10,000 and $15,000 and can easily get over $20,000 per cycle. Costs are huge. Of course, should more than one cycle be needed to get pregnant in Ontario, OHIP will cover the cost of one cycle per person in their lifetime. Third are surrogate mothers, a woman who agrees to be artificially inseminated, usually for a fee, with a view to turning over the resulting child to the biological parents. Now, surrogates must be at least 21 years of age. It's the only condition in Canada. Now, we do have legal conditions on reproductive technology. So in Canada, the Assisted Human Reproduction Act was introduced in 2004 to regulate reproductive technologies. And I'll get into this more in a minute. The issue here is that whatever the contract's participants have, it's not legal. And it can result in complications because someone changes their mind. And it has happened where someone expected the baby to be turned over and in fact the surrogate mom chose to keep it. Or in another example where the surrogate mom was prepared to hand over the baby to the biological parents who chose not to want it anymore. Complicated. Surrogacy agreements are different than contracts. Surrogacy agreements are required to be completed in a clinic before the embryo is transferred. And so, as you can imagine, this is going to bring up social and ethical issues. Socially, reproduction is generally a private matter, whereas artificial reproductive technologies tend to be much more public, ranging from fully supported to totally seeing artificial reproductive technology as wrong. So ethically, the issue tends to be more about just because we can, should we? Are there any risks? Well, the Royal Commission on New Reproductive Technologies and the Assisted Human Reproduction Act came out, and since a combination of the technologies developed really quickly and were needed to regulate the technology use. So the Royal Commission on Reproductive Technologies was set up in 1989 to recommend policies and a way to protect and provide safeguards, protect against unethical use, and protect families. The Assisted Human Reproduction Act was approved in Canada in 2004. This act also introduced the Assisted Human Reproduction Agency. Now, if you check out box 5.6, that's on page 150 to 151, and you'll see what are some of the banned activities that you can't participate in Canada. Now, what about financial barrier? Does it cost a lot? Well, yeah, it does. Artificial reproduction technologies can be very expensive. We work with a province-to-province variable. Not all provinces cover every procedure. And it raises social injustice issues. Is artificial reproduction technology available to only the rich, or is it available to everybody? Is it a right to allow better off people to have children and deny them to the poor? Will women with lower incomes become the providers rather than the recipients of such services? Desire for a baby? Money? Is that ethical? Then what about agreements and contracts in regard to artificial reproduction technologies? Are they, they're not very consistent, nor are they clearly regulated, leaving more questions than answers. Do surrogate mothers truly understand what they are agreeing to? Is it legal to use sperm or eggs taken from a comatose or dead individual? That's been an issue that's been dialogued about and attempted to be done several times in the States. It has been done in the States, but it needed to go through an ethics board. How long should frozen embryos be kept? What should be done with embryos if the prospective parents both die? What happens if the couple divorces and one partner no longer wishes to have a child? Should IVF be available for women over 55? Should prospective parents be tested to determine whether they are qualified to raise a child? One can argue that should be done anyway, but it's not. So tampering with DNA. Since the human genome has been mapped, what about designer babies? The picking of particular characteristics and particular traits just because we can. Should we? We'll touch now just briefly on individual rights versus the social policies. And here we're going to consider the balance or the inequity between our individual rights, the right to have a baby, the right to start a family, and the public interest to set social policy to generally protect us from ourselves. So for example, age 43 is the upper limit for women looking for IVF treatments in Ontario. That's a social policy. These sort of issues may grow as we as a society and individuals make choice now and in the future as to how and in what manner do we want to have our families with children. A lot of questions as to where artificial reproductive technologies will fit into Canadian society going forward. Now that completes children, yes or no. Next week we're going to explore bringing up baby, also known as socialization. All right everybody. Bye for now, and we'll see you next week.